She said it like it was a compliment. That's the part one keep coming back to. We were at Ember and Slate, one of those Seattle rooftop restaurants where the menu doesn't list prices and the lighting is specifically designed to make everyone look like they're more important than they are. 40 people. Investors, influencers, a few restaurant industry names I recognized, a few I didn't. Everyone in black or cream-colored outfits like they'd coordinated without coordinating. Delilah was at the center of the table, the way she always positioned herself. Wine glass in her right hand. New boyfriend, Barrett Voss, seated close enough to her left that their shoulders touched every few minutes. He was wearing a watch that probably cost more than my first car. He had that particular kind of energy, loud without raising his voice, always 3 seconds away from laughing at something only he found funny. Someone at the table, I think it was one of Barrett's friends, Lawson Hale, venture capital background, perpetual blazer, asked Delilah how she'd built the restaurant brand so independently. She smiled before she answered. "Oh, I had help in the early years," she said, tilting her head slightly in my direction. Just slightly. Enough. Porter was always very good at saving money. Very disciplined. A pause. That's different from actually becoming successful, of course. Quiet laughter moved around the table. The kind that's not quite loud enough to call laughter. Wine glasses shifted. Someone cleared their throat. Barrett smiled at the tablecloth. I was sitting 4 seats away from her. We had been divorced for 11 months. I was there because a mutual acquaintance had invited me without realizing she would also be there. And by the time I figured it out, leaving would have announced something I wasn't ready to announce. So I stayed. I picked up my water glass. I said nothing. Nobody at that table defended me. Not because they were unkind people, necessarily, but because defending me would have required choosing a side. And choosing a side at a rooftop restaurant in Seattle costs more than most people are willing to pay. That was the moment I realized the divorce wasn't enough for her. She needed an audience too. Cut to 4 months later. Same social circle. Some of those same faces. Watching a live charity gala interview on a screen that someone had pulled up on their phone and then connected to a restaurant's bar television because the story was moving too fast to ignore. Delilah Voss. She had started using Barrett's last name informally even without marriage. Walking out of a studio interview mid-sentence. Cameras still rolling. Barrett Voss remaining in his seat. Not following her. Not even turning his head. But I'm getting ahead of myself. I want to be precise about how the public disrespect started because it didn't begin at that dinner. The dinner was just the first time she said the quiet part in front of an audience. Online, it had been building for months. Delilah ran the social media presence for Ardor. That was the restaurant, a Pacific Northwest contemporary concept she and I had built together over 6 years in Seattle's Capitol Hill neighborhood. After the divorce, she retained operational control. I had agreed to that during settlement. My lawyer thought I was being reckless. I thought I was being reasonable. Within 60 days of the divorce finalizing, her Instagram strategy shifted. Not dramatically. Nothing that would give anyone grounds for a formal complaint. Just small things. Captions that referred to Ardor's founding as her vision. Behind-the-scenes content that framed the early years as her creative struggle. A podcast interview where she described building the restaurant despite financial conservatism from people around her, and then laughed lightly, letting the implication hang without naming it. Her wealthy friends picked it up naturally. Sky Hartwell, who hosted those charity dinner events in Madison Park, posted a reel of Delilah that included the caption, "The woman who built something real while the doubters played it safe." Lawson Hale, the venture capital man from the rooftop, commented, "This is what vision looks like. Not everyone is built for it." The comments section filled in the blanks. I watched all of it from my apartment in Eastlake. My phone was in my hand. I was drinking coffee that had gone cold. I didn't comment. I didn't respond. I didn't reach out to mutual contacts to correct anything. I just watched. I didn't realize it then, but she was already building an image designed to erase me completely. If you enjoy real stories like this, subscribe, because what happened next changed everything for me. I'm 39. Delilah is 36. We met in our mid-20s through the Seattle food industry. She was doing brand consulting for restaurants. I was doing financial compliance work for a regional hospitality group. We opened Ardor together when I was 31. 7 years of marriage. The divorce was finalized 14 months ago. The division of responsibilities was real and consistent throughout. Delilah handled everything visible. Brand identity, events, private dining partnerships, social media, the aesthetic of the place, the lighting, the menu design, the vibe. She was genuinely talented at that work. I want to be accurate here, not generous and not unkind. She was good at the image. I handled everything invisible: taxes, payroll, vendor contracts, health code compliance, licensing, insurance. Every financial relationship the restaurant had with every entity that wasn't a customer. In a functioning restaurant operation, both roles are equally important. The difference is that one role photographs well and one doesn't. I'm not a man who photographs well by nature. I'm quiet. I dress practically. I don't perform confidence in rooms where it isn't required. I speak when I have something to say, and I stay silent when I don't. People who meet me at social events usually forget I was there. People who later need someone to untangle a financial disaster usually remember me very quickly. The marriage started deteriorating about 2 years before it ended. Not with screaming, not with dramatic accusations, just with a slow, accumulating pressure. The sense that she had started comparing what we were to what she wanted us to be, and the gap was widening every quarter. Barrett Voss entered the picture, I later figured out, approximately 8 months before she asked for a divorce. He was everything the spreadsheet of her aspirations required. Seattle tech money, recently liquid from a secondary sale. The watch, the car, the restaurant reservations that required knowing someone. The social presence that communicated wealth without stating it directly. He made me look, in her framing, like a cautious man who had played it safe. The word safe came up a lot in her social circle, always delivered neutrally, always landing like an insult. Porter is very safe, someone would say, and the table would nod with a sympathy that made my coffee taste different. But the fake charity wasn't even the worst part. The micro-humiliations had a texture I've spent time thinking about since. They were never direct, never documentable, never the kind of thing you could describe to a friend without sounding paranoid. Barrett, at a rooftop investor event 3 months after my dinner at Ember and Slate, held a glass of Japanese whiskey and said to no one in particular, "The problem with middle-class thinking is the entire orientation around loss prevention. You can't build anything meaningful when your primary instinct is to protect what you already have." He wasn't looking at me when he said it. He was looking at Lawson Hale, nodding along. I was standing close enough to hear it. Delilah had been speaking to a woman near the bar. When Barrett finished, she glanced at me once. Just a glance. Then looked back at her conversation. At a charity dinner at Sky Hartwell's home in Madison Park, the kind of event where the donation ask was woven into the table centerpieces, Delilah was explaining her vision for the Ardor Community Table Fund. It was a nonprofit she had established about 4 months after the divorce. The stated mission was subsidized meals for hospitality workers in crisis. The branding was elegant. The Instagram presence was generating real engagement. Someone at the table asked who was handling the foundation's financial structure. Delilah smiled. "We have people," she said. She didn't look at me. I had been the person who handled everything financial for 6 years of that restaurant's existence. She had replaced me with "we have people" in 4 months. Nobody at that dinner asked follow-up questions. I did, later, alone in my car. Not aloud, just in my head. The kind of questions that feel small at first and then don't. Who files the 990? Who processes the donation receipts? Who authorized the EIN? Who controls the disbursement account? I told myself I was being paranoid. I was being a financial compliance professional. Actually, there's a difference. The first thing I noticed that wasn't paranoia was in October. I still had access to a few archived shared folders from the restaurant's operational period. Nothing current, nothing confidential in a meaningful sense, mostly old vendor correspondence and historical records. I was reviewing something unrelated when I found a payroll correction document from the year before the divorce. It wasn't filed correctly. That wasn't unusual. What was unusual was the pattern. For corrections in 1 quarter. Each one small enough to fall below automatic audit flags. Each one moving a modest amount from the payroll tax escrow into a suspiciously vague operational expense category. Individually, they meant nothing. Together, they described a habit. I didn't confront anyone. I didn't call Delilah. I didn't forward anything to anyone. I made a copy of the document in a personal folder, and I kept watching. In November, a former vendor of Ardor, a produce supplier Delilah had cut after the divorce, presumably because the relationship had been mine, mentioned to a mutual contact that Ardor owed them a significant outstanding balance and had been avoiding return calls for 3 months. The mutual contact told me this casually, over lunch, not realizing what they were handing me. I asked one careful follow-up question. What's the approximate outstanding amount? He said something like 45,000. I nodded. I finished my meal. In December, I started pulling public records. Not anything that required access or privilege, just public filings. Sales tax records, quarterly payroll submissions, the restaurant's most recent business license renewal. The sales tax submissions were irregular in a specific way, not absent. That would have been obvious. Irregular. Partial payments made on adjusted revenue figures that were lower than what any reasonable estimate of AITA's covers and average check would support. I sat with that for 2 weeks before I said anything to anyone. The person I said it to was my accountant, Waylon Cross. He had a small firm in Belltown, worked primarily with hospitality clients, extremely quiet, extremely precise. The kind of man whose personality I recognized because it was adjacent to mine. I walked him through what I had found. He was quiet for a long time. This isn't careless, he said finally. No, I said. This is a methodology. That's what it looks like to me. He leaned back in his chair. How far back do you want to go? As far as the public records allow. At first, I assumed the accounting errors were careless. Later, I realized they were carefully repeated. The AITA Community Table Fund was registered as a 501c3 with the IRS in the state of Washington in May, 11 months after the divorce was finalized. By January of the following year, it had processed approximately $280,000 in donation income according to its own fundraising communications. Waylon and I spent 3 weeks comparing those figures against publicly available spending disclosures. The charitable spending, the actual disbursements to hospitality workers in crisis, the stated mission, represented roughly 31% of intake. That's technically within legal territory, though it's the bottom edge of it. The rest went to operational expenses and event costs in a category labeled brand infrastructure. I kept reading. A third-party event management company had received significant payments from the foundation, just under $60,000 over 8 months. The event company's registered address was a residential address in Bellevue. Its registered agent shared a surname with Barrett Voss's younger brother. I'm not a detective. I don't frame this as clever investigative work. I'm a financial compliance professional. I know what normal looks like, and I know what abnormal looks like, and I know that abnormal with a pattern is usually intentional. I kept a folder. I labeled it simply, documentation. I didn't tell Delilah what I knew. I didn't warn her. I didn't give her an opportunity to clean anything up. I want to be honest about that. That was a choice. In February, I received a call from a man named Lawson Hale, which surprised me because Lawson Hale was Barrett Voss's investor friend from the rooftop. He had been in the room for the safe comments. He had nodded along with the middle-class thinking speech. He asked if we could meet for coffee. I said yes, because when someone from inside a situation you've been watching requests a private meeting, you don't decline. We met at a small place on Capitol Hill. He ordered an Americano. He was wearing a different blazer. He took 2 minutes of small talk and then said, very directly, I'm going to tell you something, and I need you to understand I'm telling you because it's the right thing to do, not because I have anything to gain. I waited. Barrett's been using the restaurant as a private financing mechanism. Not loudly, not in a way she probably fully understands. But the foundation, the adjusted revenue figures, the vendor relationships, there are people who've been watching that situation for about 7 months. Investors who put money into an AITA expansion concept that doesn't match any paperwork that's ever been filed. I kept my face neutral. Why are you telling me? I asked. He paused. Because the people watching this situation needed someone who knew the original financial architecture of that restaurant. Someone who could speak to what normal looked like before Barrett got involved. And someone pointed them to me. Yes. I drank my coffee. Who are the people watching it? I asked. He told me the name. I recognized it immediately. Crestline Hospitality Group, Pacific Northwest's second largest restaurant operator. They had been competing with AITA's positioning for 3 years. They had tried to acquire the building AITA leased twice, both times through polite formal offers that Delilah had declined because she considered Crestline's aesthetic beneath her brand. They're not trying to destroy her, Lawson said carefully. They're trying to acquire the asset before the liability becomes the story. What liability are we talking about, exactly? He named a figure in unpaid payroll taxes. It was more than I had estimated. I met with Crestline Hospitality Group's CFO on a Tuesday afternoon in a conference room in their South Lake Union office. Clean space. Minimal decoration. The kind of room where people talk about money without pretending the conversation is about something else. Her name was Autumn Reed. 44, precise, the kind of professional stillness I respect instinctively. She had 3 folders on the table in front of her, which I noticed she didn't open while I was speaking. She had done her research on me. She knew my role at AITA. She knew my credentials. She knew that I had not been involved in any of the financial activity that had occurred post-divorce. She also knew that I had documentation. We did not reach an agreement in that first meeting. There were 2 more meetings after it, each one slightly more specific than the last. What we eventually structured was quiet and fully legal. I won't explain every mechanism, because it isn't necessary and because some of it is still pending resolution. The short version, AITA's outstanding tax debt had reached a point where the lease could be challenged. Crestline had an established relationship with the building's ownership group. I had documentation that established a clear timeline of the financial irregularities, when they began, what the pattern was, how the foundation payments overlapped with the restaurant's operational accounts. In exchange for formal cooperation and documentation transfer, I received a minority equity position in the rebranded property post-acquisition. I also received something less formal. I received the exact calendar of Delilah's upcoming public appearances. Because Autumn Reed had one condition beyond the legal cooperation. "We want this resolved publicly," she said in the 3rd meeting. "Not because we're vindictive. Because the foundation has donors. Those donors need to know what happened before they learn it from a lawyer." I nodded. "There's a charity gala in April," she said. "Televised. She's the featured interview." I already knew about the gala. It was the Seattle Hospitality Foundation's annual event, nationally distributed on a lifestyle network. Delilah had been promoting it on Instagram for 6 weeks. Barrett had posted a reel the previous week, his arm around her shoulders, champagne in the background, captioned, "Building something real." "What's the timing?" I asked. Autumn opened one of her folders for the first time. "The interview segment is scheduled for 9:40 p.m., she said. "We'll need the documents distributed to media contacts by 9:15. She slid a single sheet across the table. I looked at it. "That works," I said. That's when I stopped trying to protect her reputation and started preparing to inherit the ruins of it. March was the quietest month I can remember in recent years. I showed up to my work. I had lunch with Waylon twice. I went to the gym. I read a book about the Japanese railroad system that I'd been meaning to get to for 2 years. I did not attend any social events where I might encounter Delilah or Barrett. I received 3 separate text messages from Delilah during March. The first asked if I had heard anything strange from former restaurant industry contacts. The second, 5 days later, asked if we could have coffee. The third was a single line. "I hope things are going well for you, Porter." I looked at that third message for a long time. I responded, "Things are good. I'm glad things worked out for you." She responded almost immediately with a single heart emoji. I set my phone face down. There's a version of that exchange that reads like a man softening toward his ex-wife. Like the distance between 2 people who once knew each other closing slightly. It wasn't that. I knew exactly what she was doing. She had sensed something. Not the specifics, not the documentation or the Crestline meetings, but some atmospheric shift, the way people who've operated close to financial risk develop a secondary sense for when the air pressure is changing. She was testing whether I was still a neutral party, whether she could trust my silence. I gave her what she needed to hear. "I'm glad things worked out for you." That line should have felt dangerous to her. It felt very calm to me. In late March, I attended one event. Deliberately. A smaller industry mixer at a wine bar in Fremont. Not the luxury dinner party tier. Just hospitality professionals, some investors, easy conversation. Barrett was there. Delilah was not. He approached me. I think he had been drinking for a while, or he simply had the kind of confidence that doesn't require permission. "Porter," he said, like we were old friends. "Barrett," I said. "No hard feelings about all this," he said, gesturing vaguely at the air between us, meaning the divorce, meaning Delilah, meaning the whole accumulated architecture of my replacement in her life. "None," I said. "She's in a better place," he said. "You get that, right? She needed someone who could move at her level." I held my glass. "She seems happy," I said. He studied me for a moment, trying to find something, hurt or resentment, or the visible wound he expected to be there. I didn't give him anything to find. "You're a strange guy," he said, not unkindly. "Just observationally." "I've heard that," I said. He drifted back toward his group. I stayed for another 20 minutes and then left. The gala was held at a waterfront event space in downtown Seattle, the kind of venue with floor-to-ceiling windows, a view of Elliott Bay, and staff who had been trained to anticipate needs rather than respond to them. I was not attending. I was in my apartment in Eastlake, watching the live stream on my laptop. The event had a red carpet entry segment. Delilah arrived in a green dress, deep emerald, structured, extremely photographable. Barrett was beside her in a dark suit, his watch visible in every photo, his hand at her lower back. They posed. They smiled. An interviewer asked Delilah about the community table fund. She spoke for 30 seconds about impact and access and building something meaningful for the industry's most vulnerable workers. The livestream comments were warm. I watched and I drank a glass of water and I waited. At 9:12 p.m., Waylon Cross sent me a confirmation text. Documents received by 7 contacts. Confirmed. The 7 contacts included 2 Seattle journalists covering the local hospitality beat, 1 regional financial reporter, a representative from the Washington State Department of Revenue's Audit Division, who had been independently building a case and simply needed organized documentation. The IRS whistleblower contact Autumn Reed's legal team had filed with 30 days prior, and the Arter Community Table Fund's 2 most significant individual donors. At 9:18, the formatted tax discrepancy analysis, 14 pages, organized by quarter, with specific figures, specific account references, and a clear timeline, hit email inboxes. At 9:22, the first donor called the foundation's public contact number. There was no answer. The interview segment began at 9:41, 1 minute behind schedule. The host was a woman named Lennon Park, well known on the lifestyle circuit, warm on-camera presence, the kind of interviewer who asks difficult questions in a tone that makes them feel like compliments until you realize what she just asked. Delilah sat across from her on a small stage at the edge of the event's main space. Barrett was visible at a table perhaps 30 feet away. Champagne. The watch. Lawson Hale beside him. Lennon opened warmly. Arter Story. The brand. The community table fund. Delilah settled into it the way she always settled into this kind of attention. Naturally, fluently, with the practiced ease of someone who had done the media training and found it confirmed things she already believed about herself. At 9:44, Lennon Park's earpiece delivered something. I could tell from the pause. Just half a beat. The micro-adjustment professionals make when the information coming in doesn't match the script they're holding. I want to stay on the foundation for a moment, Lennon said. Can you walk us through how the operational expense structure works? Specifically the disbursement ratio to actual beneficiary support. It was a reasonable question. Any competent foundation operator should have a clean answer. Delilah smiled. Of course. We take a full-service approach to operations, which means some overhead to support the mission properly. About 69% overhead, Lennon said. A pause. I'm sorry. The room shifted. Not dramatically. Not a collective gasp. Just the particular stillness that happens in a room full of people who suddenly understand that the event they are attending has changed categories. Delilah's expression moved through 3 things in less than 2 seconds. Surprise, then calculation, then a very studied calm. Those numbers aren't. There's some context to how we categorize. The Washington Department of Revenue has flagged unpaid sales tax obligations for Arter Restaurant totaling approximately $210,000 over 6 quarters, Lennon said. Her voice was still warm. That was somehow worse. Are you aware of an active state inquiry? Barrett Voss received something on his phone at 9:47 p.m. I know the timing because I was watching his face. The watch moved first. He checked it, which meant his hand moved, which meant the watch caught the light. Then he looked at his phone. Then he looked at the stage. Then he looked at his phone again. He said something to Lawson Hale. Lawson Hale looked at his own phone. At 9:49, a text message reached Barrett's phone. I learned the contents of this later, secondhand, but I'll include it, from his financial manager. 3 words. Call me immediately. The Crestline Hospitality Group had filed the acquisition paperwork at 9:30 p.m. The building owner had confirmed the lease transition at 9:45. The official announcement went to press contacts at 9:50. On the stage, Delilah was managing. Barely, but managing. Attempting to reframe. Speaking about the complexity of nonprofit accounting. Using the language of good intentions. Lennon Park was not cruel. She was simply prepared. We've received documentation tonight suggesting the accounting irregularities at AITA predate the foundation by approximately 16 months, she said, and that a significant portion of what was listed as restaurant operational expense during that period was redirected to personal accounts. The comment section of the live stream had shifted. I could see it in a second window on my laptop. The warmth was gone. Barrett Voss stood up from his table at 9:52 p.m. Not dramatically. He didn't make a scene. He put his phone in his jacket pocket, pushed his chair back with both hands in a way that was controlled and deliberate, said something brief to Lawson-Hale, and walked toward the exit. Not toward the stage. Not toward Delilah. Toward the exit. Lawson-Hale stayed seated. A woman near their table was recording on her phone. She caught the walk. She caught the direction he chose. On the stage, Delilah had not yet seen him leave. She was still in the middle of something that had stopped being an interview and hadn't quite become anything else yet. Some suspended state between performance and disaster where the muscles haven't received the signal to stop smiling, but the eyes already know. Lennon Park's producer had come to the edge of the stage. At 9:54, Delilah looked toward Barrett's table. The chair was empty. The watch was not there. The champagne glass was still there. I watched her face process this. There are people who, under sufficient public pressure, reveal something true about themselves. Not deliberately. It just surfaces, the unedited response before the management system kicks back in. What surfaced on Delilah's face in that moment was not anger. It was a very specific kind of recognition. The recognition of someone who understands, in a single moment, the full architecture of what has just happened and where it started and who built it. She looked at the empty chair. She looked back at Lennon Park. She looked at the cameras. She looked, briefly, at nothing. Then she stood. She said something quiet to the host that the cameras didn't fully pick up. The lip readers on social media spent 3 days on it later, and she walked off the stage. Not running. Not dramatic. Just gone. The cameras stayed on the empty chairs for 4 seconds before cutting to a commercial break. I closed my laptop at 9:58 p.m. I washed the glass I'd been drinking from. My phone had been receiving notifications for 11 minutes, and I had not looked at them. I stood there for a while. I had spent approximately 5 months in a very steady, controlled orientation toward this outcome. Not emotional. Not satisfying in the way revenge narratives are supposed to feel satisfying. Just logistical. Just the sequential completion of one careful step after another. The people who had laughed at those dinner tables, quietly, over their wine glasses, were already sending each other messages in the group chats I was not part of. Sky Hartwell deleted her Instagram post about Delilah within 22 minutes of the interview ending. Lawson-Hale, from what I heard later, went home alone that night and did not post anything for 11 days. The AITA Community Table Fund's website was taken offline at 11:14 p.m. I learned that from Waylon, who texted me around midnight. He also sent a single line. Clean work. I didn't respond until the next morning. The formal sequences moved quickly once they started. The Washington State Department of Revenue opened a formal audit proceeding within 72 hours. The IRS whistleblower filing triggered a parallel federal review that was confirmed in writing 6 weeks later. The AITA building completed its transfer to Crestline Hospitality Group's management entity before the end of the month. The rebrand announcement cited new leadership and operational direction. The press release used the phrase commitment to financial transparency twice. I attended one meeting related to the property transition. I sat in the same kind of clean conference room in South Lake Union. Autumn Reed was across the table. She slid a document toward me. The minority equity position we had discussed. I signed it. She nodded. Neither of us said anything meaningful beyond the legal formalities. The charity board, 3 people Delilah had appointed, 2 of whom had been her personal friends, resigned within 10 days of the interview. The third issued a public statement attempting to separate herself from the financial decisions. Nobody paid much attention to it. Donors had submitted formal complaints. 2 of them went public. One, a hospitality industry foundation that had contributed $40,000 to the Community Table Fund, announced they would pursue civil recovery. Barrett Voss was photographed in Miami Beach 11 days after the gala, with someone else. The photograph appeared in a social account that tracked luxury lifestyle and investment circles. He was wearing a different watch. Nobody appeared surprised by this, which says something about what people had known but not said. Delilah did not post on Instagram for 3 weeks after the gala. When she returned, It was a single photograph, not a restaurant photo, not a charity photo, not a branding image. A photograph of a coffee cup on a plain surface. No caption. The comment section was mostly empty. A few people had left question marks. One person wrote, "We miss you," and I think it was a bot. What I keep thinking about, in the months since, is not the interview. Not the empty chair. Not the moment her face moved through those 3 expressions on the stage. What I keep thinking about is the dinner at Ember and Slate. The tilted head. The wine glass. The phrase delivered like a footnote. That's different from actually becoming successful, of course. She was right that we're different. She was right that I'm disciplined in ways she isn't. She was right that I never wanted what she wanted. She was wrong about what it meant. The thing about being the person who handles compliance and taxes and financial architecture is that you understand something most people don't take seriously until it's too late. The invisible infrastructure is what holds everything up. You can build the most beautiful facade imaginable. You can get the lighting right and the branding right and the investor attention right. You can have the right watch and the right table and the right audience laughing at the right moment. But if the foundation isn't clean, someone is always going to find it. Usually quietly. Usually when you're not expecting it. Usually when the cameras are already rolling. The people who worshipped appearances always disappear first when reality arrives. I watched a room full of them do it in real time, and I felt exactly as much as I expected to feel, which was very close to nothing. Just the particular emptiness of a finished task. Before the commercial break ended, she was already sitting alone.